On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our player previews, and today we're talking about Tanner Jeannot.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Denker. I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give it a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel there as well. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we are just continuing our player preview segment for the upcoming season, and today we are talking about Tanner Jeannot. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and go back and listen or watch some of our other player previews. We got done talking about Andrei Vasilevsky the other day. We've talked about Victor Hedman, Nick Paul, Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, and Kitty Kucherov. We'll continue to talk about all the Lightning players as we get ever closer to the season starting up in 7 days, which we don't have a lot of time, and we have a lot of players still to go through. So we're definitely going to probably have some days where we're going to be putting out maybe 2 episodes at once. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So go ahead, and once you do subscribe to our podcast, wherever it may be, go ahead and hit that notification button. So talking about Tanner Jeannot, this is one that if you've been listening for quite some time, you know that this was one when I announced that we were doing player previews. This was one where I really thought, not really thought, I was really more excited about it just because there's been so much conversation around Tanner Jeannot for obvious reasons, for the haul that the Lightning gave up last year during the trade deadline, and him coming to Tampa Bay and just not being able to put it together. And that's not his fault. You know, it's not like he had any sort of input when he was traded from Nashville to Tampa Bay. It just became a scenario of when we spoke about it in the moment, and when it happened, and afterwards, and throughout certain points during the season, the off season. I've talked about it, how, you know, the expectations that are put towards him versus what we know he could do, and you know, maybe the situation might be a little bit different if the Lightning were actually giving Nashville some sort of reasonable lot to where it made sense. Because if this was any other player, or if this was any other situation where the Lightning gave up maybe a draft pick and a prospect, or whatever the case may be, something that was significantly less than what they gave Nashville, I think the conversation around Tanner Jeannot would definitely be a little less critical, I think. And I'm not saying that, you know, I think it's 50-50 when we look at the criticism. We look at the criticism of, I think it's geared towards the franchise itself, more so Julian Bruce-Boss. And I wouldn't say it's criticism towards Jeannot. I think it's a little bit more just frustration that he's not living up to these really high expectations. Because when you look at what was traded for him, and I'm not going to go over that. If you want to go back and take a look at that, you're more than welcome, obviously. But when you look back at what, you know, what was given up for him, really at the end of the day, you know, I think some people kind of looked at him more as the savior than just the guy who was going to be able to come in and be a piece. And I think that's obviously something that going forward, you know, whatever it is, whatever frustrations and criticisms that we had about Tanner Jeannot last year, I think that would, as a fan base and as people who follow hockey and you know, follow the Lightning as well, but we kind of need to just distance ourselves from that. And I think Tanner Jeannot needs to as well, because I'm sure the expectations that he put towards himself were equally as high, if not more, because of what was given up for him. I think I haven't heard anything that he has said throughout the offseason or last year, and I doubt he's going to talk about it until maybe later on in his career. But I think that he definitely put a lot of pressure on himself, and you kind of saw it throughout certain points in the season last year. And you got to remind yourself that he only played 20 games in Tampa Bay last year, and for certain players, 20 games isn't nearly enough to get yourself going. 20 games isn't, in my opinion, a fair, especially if a player is struggling immensely like he did or underperformed like he did. I don't think it's a fair assessment, a fair sample size to judge a player just because he's played 20 games and hasn't played well. Like I said, sometimes certain players, I mean, it could take a guy like a Sorelli or a Kucherov or a Point, guys that we've seen in the past who have missed a good amount of games, be able to come out and do a lot in 20 games, where a guy like Tanner Jeannot, that's just not his game. A guy who is kind of more so a supporting cast player. And that's not something, I'm not trying to diminish or downgrade his role with this team, but that's really what he is. He's a third line forward. He's a guy that's going to come here and be a depth player, which is perfectly fine. I mean, on the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think it's more valuable to be a depth player than a superstar. But kind of just going back on his stats and real quick, so we kind of get, so those of you listening who are maybe new to the whole Tanner Jeannot, I guess saga or situation, whatever you want to call it here, that's going on in Tampa Bay, because I believe that especially if he comes out of gates a little bit slow, which I won't have a problem with, I think there's definitely going to be some discussion still about it and be like, did Julian Breeze-Ross totally miss the mark on that? With him, no, I don't think so. Like I said, I think it was a scenario where they just kind of waited too long to make a move at the deadline last year. And Jeannot was always in the conversation, but at the same time, the Lightning waited too long. And I'm sure there was other offers on the table for Nashville. But whatever the case may be. So looking at Jeannot's stats last year with Tampa Bay alone, that was 20 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, plus minus in the negatives at 6. So not good whatsoever, but his totals on the season come out to 76 games, 6 goals, 18 points, plus minus of -7. So even overall, not as good as that you would have wanted it to be. If you're trying to sugarcoat it to a certain extent, if even if you're not a Lightning fan, at least maybe you're a Tanner Jeannot fan, and you're kind of looking at his stats and kind of asking yourself, what's the silver lining here? Well, the silver lining really with Tanner Jeannot is that if you look at his previous year, and that's obviously a lot of the hype that is surrounding this guy, is that if you look at his 21-22 season, then Lightning fans should be somewhat familiar with him because he was on Nashville when they played that outdoor game in Nashville, is through 81 games, which really was his first full season in the NHL. He played 81 games, 24 goals, 41 points. Very physical player, a guy who really, I think that when we were looking at him even in 21-22, I probably kind of spoke about it at least here and there. Maybe, I mean, that was a couple of seasons ago, so I don't remember, but that was probably definitely a guy who, if he was on the market, which he wasn't, because I believe Nashville was actually pretty good that year, I feel like that would have been 100% the go-to guy, the guy that the Lightning typically have been trying to get ever since the third line from their Stanley Cup winning years disintegrated. They've gotten that with Nick Paul. Now they're trying to get that with Mikey Eyssimont as well as Tanner Jeannot. And you know what? Like I said, there's really not much that we could say about the previous season with him. There's really not much that we could go into detail with him. 20 games, in my opinion, it's not fair. It's not a fair assessment. It's not really something that as us as hockey fans or us as those of us who cover the sport can really look back and say, well, you know what? He let his team down. No, he didn't. It was just this whole kind of just mingling of just high pressure and him not being able to measure up to that pressure because of the ridiculous trade package that was given up for him. So we'll talk about expectations for him for this upcoming year. I am fairly certain that he's going to turn it around. 24 goals, not entirely sure if that's plausible right now for him. But we'll definitely see if he could get somewhat close to that in just a minute. But first, we're going to talk about one of our friends, one of our sponsors, and that is our friends over at eBay Motors. Now, passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So once again, as always, like how we like to start off the second segment of every episode, we'd like to thank all of our listeners for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We are available on social media. LO_Lightning on X, formerly known as Twitter. Lockdown_Lightning on Instagram. Give me a follow on Twitter at DankyDank. DENKYD8NK. Love hearing from all of you. Love the back and forth that I've here and there been getting from listeners throughout the course of the off season, and also as well as on our YouTube, the comment section. You guys have been phenomenal with kind of your feedback, as well as, you know, just your observations and opinions on everything that we've been talking about here on the show. So I love hearing from all of you, and, you know, keep it up as we get ever closer to the season. 7 days away, and, you know, a lot of things are going to really be, you know, a lot louder. A lot of criticisms, a lot of conversations are going to be had this season. You know, this is probably one of the, I would say probably maybe since 2019, where we all know what happened in the first round of the playoffs. This is one of the first regular seasons I could think of since then, where the anticipation is very high, but I think for the wrong reasons. Andre Vasilevsky's out for 2 months. Steven Stamkos, still no new contract. What's going to happen with him? Is this his last year with the Lightning? Is this his last hurrah in Tampa Bay? Or is he coming back? You have that. He's clearly not happy. And then Tanner Jeannot. I think those are the three top storylines going into this season, because Tanner Jeannot, as we all know, huge expectations for him last year after being traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the middle of the season. Played 20 games, really didn't do much of anything. And like I said, that's not his fault. You know, not everybody could be Nick Paul and come in the middle of the season and completely light the world on fire. That's just not realistic, you know. And I think Nick Paul will even tell you that was just something that was just unbelievable, and I'm sure he couldn't even believe it as it was happening himself. And with Tanner Jeannot, I think that this year is going to be another learning year for him. You know, he's still very young into his NHL career. He's only been in the league since he's 23. He's 25, going on 26. Well, he just turned 26 back in May. So really 3 years, we could say, maybe 3.5. He's still very much learning. There's still a lot to his game that he needs to develop, physically, skill-wise, mentally. As we could tell, as we've seen as well with a lot of players, especially Lightning players, they don't really hit their stride till age 26. And I think a full offseason with Tampa Bay is really going to do wonders for Tanner Jeannot. Now, having said that, I will say that I do not think that we are going to see a year like what he had his 21-22 season, in which, like I said, 24 goals, 41 points. We might see something close to that. I think the high that we could expect from him this year is probably 20 goals, but I think that your expectation should be a little bit more around 15, if anything, especially being on the third line, especially with at least the expectation for me that there's going to be a lot of jumbling of this lineup because a lot of some question marks here and there. Like I said, Stamkos, even with that the whole contract situation going on, I still believe that Brandon Hagel is the best choice for the first line forward position on the wing. I think that Paul, Esimont, and Jeannot is a solid line. You have a guy down the middle and Nick Paul who could kind of take control of that line, who could also score as well, who's very good at distributing the puck. You have a guy in Mikey Esimont who really a lot of us enjoyed, including yours truly, last year, seeing him play in the limited time that he had, who really has potential to be kind of what we saw from Tanner Jeannot when he was in Nashville. Now, there's still a lot of hockey that needs to be played before we could even maybe be disappointed or surprised by what Mikey Esimont does. Having said that, with Tanner Jeannot being on that line with those two other guys, I think even though he will be on the wing, I think he's going to play more of a very physical part on that line. The one thing that we could count on with Tanner Jeannot, and that's perfectly fine, and what we've seen with other players that have struggled offensively and just generally putting up numbers, positive numbers, is if they play physical and they have that instinct and that knack, that's something that me personally, I think that as long as they're playing physical, they're getting into the dirty areas, they're doing all the little things right, I think that is enough to keep the team afloat and to keep the people, to allow the personnel around them to be successful. I don't think that's going to happen this year in terms of, I think we're going to see the stats, like I said, kind of go up with Tanner Jeannot. I think he's going to have a year, I would say probably 15-15, which amounts to 30 points, which I think for coming off a year in which he only had 14, and as long as the plus minus is in the positive, I'm fine with him having a 15-15 year, especially on the third line. He wasn't brought in to score goals and be one of the top point getters on this team. No, we already have that. We have Braden Point. We have Nikita Kucherov. Steven Stamkos will contribute. Anthony Cirelli's there. Brandon Hagel. List goes on of guys who could for sure tally the points on almost a nightly basis here. Tanner Jeannot's one responsibility is to go out there, disrupt the flow of the game, swing the ice when need be in favor of the Lightning, play very physical at a high speed, and get the occasional points here and there. And I think that's a reasonable expectation from him. I'm not expecting 30 goals, not expecting 70 points, especially not on the third line. That's, if he's going at that rate, he won't be playing on the third line for much longer. I think that at the end of the day, like I said, as long as he plays physical at a high speed and he plays smart and he doesn't take stupid penalties, I think for the most part, at least that line with Paul and Esimont, as long as Esimont's kind of, also doing this same thing, I think that third line is as good as it's going to get for this team. I fully expect that third line to play a lot of minutes too, as well. I think that with especially the way the division is, especially with how much better it's gotten now, Boston still don't know what kind of team they're going to be. Was last year a fluke? Is this year going to be a little bit of a backslide for them? You got Buffalo, who kind of looks like they're a goaltender away. Toronto, I know they're going to be a top 3 team in the division. Just where they fall, I think it really depends on Tampa Bay and Florida. And who knows what Detroit's going to do this year. I think that how physical those games get between all the teams that I just listed off, including Ottawa as well, because the Tampa Bay Lightning never play well against Ottawa. I think that John Cooper is going to rely more on this third line for the physicality, for the sandpaper hockey, than what we've normally seen in the regular season over the last couple of years. I think he's going to want to kind of roll out his third line a little bit more often to allow them to kind of wear down the other team. So then you could hit them with the swift punch back with Point, Cooch, Hagel, Sorelli, Sherry. So, I think that's the way it should go, especially with Vasilevsky being out for 10 weeks tops. I think that's the way to go. And I think that Tanner Jeannot, like I said, is going to play a huge part in the success, not only for the first 2 months of the season, but for the duration of the season heading into the Stanley Cup playoffs. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. What are your thoughts on Tanner Jeannot? Do you think he's overrated? Do you think he's underrated? Do you think that maybe he's getting a raw deal because of what was given up for him? Let me know all of that. Let me know, and I will obviously address it on the next episode. So we'll wrap things up in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our friends over at Athletic Greens. Now, I love Athletic Greens. I drink AG1 in the morning, right before I make my coffee, and it makes me feel unstoppable, ready to take on the world, just like the Tampa Bay Lightning will be a week from now. And it gives me everything I need to get in shape, to feel better. And it has all the nutrients in one, where I don't have to take a bunch of supplements, to where I could just get all at once and get on with my day. I've just noticed I have more energy. I've noticed that I have better gut health, and it's really something that I really want all of you to have as part of your life as well. So go to athleticgreens.com right now, because listen, it's $3 a day just to keep your health in check, to keep your body in check as we get into the winter months. So it's a comprehensive solution, is what you need from your supplement new routine. Then try AG1 to get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out. So wrapping things up on the show. I mean, I personally think that Tanner Jeannot is going to be fine. I think he has a skill set that's sustainable. I think, it's not like we're asking a 30, 40 goal guy who's coming off a 12 goal season to come in and bounce back. I think, and this might be oversimplifying it, but I think that really, when it comes down to, I think playing physical and playing the kind of game that Jeannot has is a lot easier to get back than being a scorer. You really don't see scorers have that much of down years unless, it's at the end of their career. Jeannot, that's a sustainable brand of hockey. And he's very much young in his career and early in his career, where we don't have to worry about any downslide. And he has enough players around him who play somewhat of a similar style, to where it's not going to be a situation where it's going to fall all on him. I think at the end of the day, that as long as he does what he needs to do and other players come to the table, I think that this is a recipe for success. I don't see him at any point during the season going above the third line. If that's something that happens, one of two things. It's either that he's having a phenomenal scoring season, or the Lightning are playing brutal and Cooper's doing anything everything to get this team going, and that's not a good sign, obviously. Ideally, I would like to see him maybe in the long term down the road. And when I say down the road, maybe 2 years if he's still in Tampa. I would like to see him uh, on the second line. I don't think he'll ever be a first line player. Second line, I think he could be a good supporting cast guy. But I think at the end of the day, you know, that's more so something that we could look at, like I said in the Nick Paul episode. That's more so something that we could expect from Nick Paul. So yeah, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about more of our player previews. Like I said, subscribe to the podcast because we got a lot of players still that we need to talk about and only 7 days left. So we'll be dropping multiple episodes here and there, just so we got everybody covered. So tomorrow we'll be talking about Eric Chernak. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Is he one of the saving graces for the Tampa Bay Lightning this season as they attempt to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals? So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.